You're standing on the factory floor of Boeing's Seattle plant on a Monday morning in December 1941. The massive assembly hall, which just days ago buzzed with the voices of thousands of male workers building the 17 flying fortresses, now echoes with an eerie quiet. Workstations sit abandoned. Half-assembled aircraft frames tower overhead like mechanical skeletons. The attack on Pearl Harbor has changed everything, and within weeks, those empty stations will be filled again, but not by the men who left them. They'll be filled by women. What's about to unfold across America represents one of the most dramatic social transformations in the nation's history. Over the next 4 years, more than 6 million women will enter the industrial workforce, shattering centuries of social conventions about what women could and couldn't do. They'll weld Liberty ships in California, rivet bomber fuselages in Connecticut, forge tank parts in Michigan, and assemble ammunition in Pennsylvania. They'll prove that the hands that rocked the cradle could also build the arsenal of democracy. But this story begins with a crisis. By early 1942, the United States military is mobilizing at an unprecedented scale. 16 million American men, representing 40 to 53% of eligible men in various states, are either enlisting or being drafted into service. They're leaving farms, factories, offices, and shipyards to fight a two-front war across the Atlantic and Pacific. The math is simple and terrifying. America needs to outproduce the Axis powers in tanks, ships, planes, and ammunition. But suddenly, the workers who built those weapons are the same ones being sent to use them. The War Manpower Commission, a federal agency established specifically to address this labor shortage, faces a seemingly impossible task. How do you maintain, let alone increase, war production when your entire workforce is disappearing? The answer, though radical for its time, is the only one that makes sense. You turn to the largest untapped labor pool in the country, women. In 1940, approximately 12 million women work outside the home in the United States. Most occupy low-paying positions that society deems appropriate for their gender. They work as domestics, cleaning other people's homes. They serve as clerks in department stores, earning minimal wages. They wait tables in diners and restaurants. They sew in garment factories under poor conditions. Some work as teachers and nurses, among the few respectable professions open to women. But the manufacturing sector, especially the skilled, high-paying jobs, remains almost entirely closed to them. The cultural attitudes are formidable obstacles. Many men believe women should only have jobs that men don't want. Others insist that women should give up any employment so unemployed men can work instead, especially after the Great Depression left so many families struggling. Still others hold that middle-class women should never lower themselves to work outside the home at all. The factory floor, the shipyard, the aircraft assembly line, these are men's domains, and the prevailing wisdom says women simply can't handle the physical demands or technical complexity. Think about that for a moment. What would it take to change the minds of an entire nation? Those attitudes are about to be challenged like never before. The government launches what will become one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in American history. Posters begin appearing in post offices, train stations, and shop windows across the country. They feature strong, confident women in work clothes, rolling up their sleeves. The messages are direct and powerful. We can do it. The more women at work, the sooner we win. Do the job he left behind. Newspaper advertisements and radio spots blanket the nation. They glamorize factory work, portraying it as patriotic, exciting, and financially rewarding. Recruitment posters appear everywhere, in beauty salons, grocery stores, anywhere women gather. The imagery deliberately makes industrial work look appealing, sometimes even fashionable. Women in welding gear are portrayed not as masculine or unfeminine, but as modern patriots doing their part for the boys overseas. The campaign creates an iconic figure who will define this moment in history, Rosie the Riveter. She's not based on a single real person, though her name may have originated with Rose Benavida, a riveter at a bomber plant who set a production record by driving 3,345 rivets in a single shift. An astonishing feat that earned her a commendation letter from President Franklin Roosevelt himself. Norman Rockwell's painting of Rosie, a muscular woman in overalls eating a sandwich with a rivet gun on her lap, appears on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post in May 1943. The image becomes instantly iconic. But perhaps the most famous image associated with Rosie is the "We Can Do It" poster showing a woman in a red polka dot bandana flexing her arm. You've probably seen this image countless times without realizing its wartime origins. Originally created for Westinghouse Electric as an internal morale booster, the poster becomes the enduring symbol of women's wartime work. That woman, determined, strong, capable, represents millions of real women who are about to transform American industry. The recruitment campaign works beyond anyone's expectations. According to the Encyclopedia of American Economic History, Rosie the Riveter inspires a social movement that increases the number of working American women from 12 million to 20 million by 1944. A staggering 57% increase in just 4 years. By 1945, women represent 37% of the entire American workforce. Nearly 1 out of every 4 married women now works outside the home, a dramatic shift from pre-war norms. But statistics don't capture the human reality of this transformation. Here's what the numbers don't tell us. These aren't just numbers. They're individual women making life-changing decisions, often against the wishes of their families. They're young women fresh out of high school, eager to prove themselves. They're mothers with children, balancing childcare with 8-hour shifts. They're college-educated professionals who see an opportunity to use their skills. They're women who've worked their entire lives, but never had access to jobs that paid decent wages. Consider the story of Agnes Moore from Richmond, California. At 99 years old, when she shared her story decades later, she vividly remembered her decision to become a shipyard welder in 1942. Her mother was horrified, trying to talk her out of it. "Oh no, this is an important job," Agnes told her mother. "They're advertising for us on the radio to go do this, and that's what I want to do." Agnes had only seen the ocean a few months before becoming a welder, but everything about the work was new and exciting. She served on the outfitting dock, helping complete the massive Liberty ships that would carry supplies to troops overseas. Or take Marian Souza, hired as a draftsman at the Richmond Shipyards, responsible for revising the blueprints constructed in the engineering department. "Your T-square was your guide to everything," she recalled. "Your measurements and everything had to be very precise." Sousa traveled from Oregon in the summer of 1942, part of a massive migration of workers to industrial centers. Years later, she reflected, the women proved they could hold their own as welders. Picture yourself in their shoes for a moment. These women are driven by different motivations. Some join defense plants out of pure patriotism, wanting to support their country in its hour of need. Others have husbands, brothers, sons, or boyfriends in the military and wish to help support the troops through their employment. Many take factory jobs because they desperately need the money. These positions offer wages far higher than anything they could earn as domestic servants or secretaries. A woman who made maybe $10 or $15 a week cleaning houses could earn $40 or more as a welder or riveter. But the path from recruitment poster to factory floor isn't smooth. Women face skepticism and resistance at every turn. The War Manpower Commission has to overcome not just men's attitudes toward women in the workforce, but surprisingly, women's own ideas about work outside the home. Many women have internalized the message that factory work is unfeminine, that real women focus on home and family. The propaganda campaign must convince women themselves that taking these jobs doesn't make them less womanly. The recruiters get creative. They canvass stores that women frequent, setting up booths in department stores and shopping districts. They tell women that they can work without previous education or experience, that the shipyards and factories will train them. They emphasize that this work supports sons, husbands, and brothers overseas. Critically, they assure women that they'll be expected to return back to the kitchen once the war ends, framing factory work as temporary patriotic service rather than a permanent career shift. It's a message designed to make the proposition less threatening to traditional gender roles. By mid-1942, the first waves of women began entering training programs. At shipyards, aircraft factories, and munitions plants across the country, hastily organized training schools teach women skills that traditionally took years to master. They learn to read blueprints, operate complex machinery, weld steel, rivet aluminum, wire electrical systems. Some training happens in dedicated schools, but much of it occurs on the factory floor itself, with women learning by doing under the supervision of the skilled male workers who haven't yet been drafted. The learning curve is steep, but women prove remarkably adaptable. Employers who initially estimated that only 29% of jobs would be acceptable for women raised that figure to 85% by July 1942 in just 6 months. What changes? Not the jobs themselves, but employers' recognition that women are perfectly capable of performing them. Cities across America begin to feel the impact. Mobile, Alabama sees 90,000 workers swarm into the city to work in local war factories, especially the two major shipyards, Gulf Shipbuilding and Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding, and the Alcoa aluminum plant. The Alcoa facility alone produces 34% of the nation's aluminum, essential for aircraft production. Men still work at these plants, but without women, the facilities would never reach their production targets. Richmond, California undergoes an even more dramatic transformation. The Kaiser shipyards there eventually employ 90,000 workers, one-third of them women. Some shipyards see women make up 60% of the workforce. These women cut, shape, weld, rivet, and position tons of steel daily, doing the same work as men and facing the same occupational hazards. By the end of the war, the Richmond Kaiser shipyards alone will have built more than 1,000 Liberty and Victory-class freighters and cargo ships. Each Liberty ship requires approximately 150,000 rivets. Backbreaking, skilled work performed increasingly by women. The scale of mobilization is staggering. By 1945, there are 4.7 million women in clerical positions, an 89% increase from before the war. Another 4.5 million work as factory operatives, a 112% increase. The aviation industry sees the most dramatic shift. By 1943, 310,000 women work in the U.S. aircraft industry, representing 65% of the sector's total workforce. Before the war, women comprised just 1% of aviation workers. In some plants, women go from being virtually invisible to representing nearly two-thirds of all employees in less than 2 years. But this mass mobilization isn't happening in a vacuum. African American women face double discrimination, both as women and as Black Americans. Before the war, most Black women work as domestic servants, performing cooking, cleaning, and childcare in white households. These jobs offer minimal pay and zero benefits. The explosion in defense industry work represents an unprecedented opportunity if they can access it. Initially, many defense contractors refused to hire African Americans at all, or relegate them to the lowest paying, least skilled positions. Some companies don't want to hire black workers. Other times, white employees threaten to strike if forced to work alongside black Americans. President Roosevelt responds by signing Executive Order 8802 in 1941, which bans discrimination in the defense industry. But the order doesn't automatically translate into equal treatment on the ground. Discrimination continues in many factories, and black women have to fight for access to the same opportunities white women are receiving. Despite these barriers, African American women make significant gains. By 1944, black women in domestic service positions decrease by 15.3%, while their employment in defense work increases by 11.5%. It's not equality, but it's progress. For many black women, factory work represents their first opportunity to earn a living wage and work in conditions that don't involve serving white families. The experience plants seeds that will grow into the civil rights movement 2 decades later. As 1942 progresses, America's factories hum with renewed energy. The empty workstations are filled again. Production lines that ground to a halt after Pearl Harbor are running at full capacity, then exceeding it. Women are welding, riveting, wiring, assembling, and inspecting the weapons that will win the war. They're building the B-17 bombers that will pound German industry, the Liberty ships that will break the U-boat blockade, the tanks that will roll across France. But here's what most history books leave out. The factory floor is just the beginning. As America's industrial might awakens, another transformation is already underway, one that will see women don military uniforms and serve in nearly every capacity short of direct combat. The story of women's wartime contribution extends far beyond Rosie the Riveter. It includes pilots ferrying fighters across the Atlantic, radio operators serving in the Pacific, codebreakers cracking Japanese and German encryptions, and nurses treating wounded soldiers from North Africa to the Philippines. The call has been answered. Now comes the hard part, proving they belong. By the spring of 1943, you can hear America's industrial transformation from miles away. The constant hammering of rivets echoes across Richmond's shipyards. The screech of metal cutting through steel fills aircraft factories from Seattle to Long Island. The roar of blast furnaces illuminates night skies over Pittsburgh and Gary. And everywhere, women are at the center of the action. Walk onto the floor of any major defense plant in 1943, and you'll see a sight that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. Women operate massive stamping presses, shaping sheet metal into aircraft components. They maneuver overhead cranes, moving multi-ton steel plates into position. They crawl inside the cramped fuselages of bombers, connecting intricate electrical wiring systems. They stand on scaffolding 30 feet in the air, welding seams that must be absolutely perfect to keep ships watertight. The work is physically demanding, technically complex, and often dangerous. At the Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, women face the same occupational hazards as their male colleagues. They work with molten metal that can cause severe burns. They operate in noisy environments where hearing damage is common. They breathe in metal fumes and dust that irritate lungs. They risk crushing injuries from heavy machinery and falling materials. Women suffer from many of the same medical problems that male workers experience: industrial accidents, respiratory issues, exhaustion from long shifts. Imagine working those conditions every single day. The hours are grueling. Defense plants operate around the clock, with 3 8-hour shifts ensuring production never stops. Many women work 6 or 7 days a week. Overtime is common, with 10 or 12-hour shifts during production pushes. And unlike male workers, most women are working what amounts to a double shift. 8 hours in the factory, then coming home to cook, clean, and care for children. Rationing, childcare challenges, and overcrowded housing add to the strain. Yet the women persevere, and their productivity astonishes even skeptical supervisors. At Boeing's Seattle plant, women assemble B-17 flying fortresses with precision that matches or exceeds the quality of work done by men. In Connecticut, women at the Sikorsky plant rivet helicopter components with remarkable speed. At steel mills in Pennsylvania, women forge tank parts that meet exacting military specifications. Some women become legends in their own right. Rosie the Riveter, working on bomber aircraft, drives 3,345 rivets in a single work shift on June 8, 1943, a production record that earns national recognition. President Franklin Roosevelt personally writes her a letter of commendation. Her accomplishment gives a name and face to the iconic Rosie the Riveter figure. Gladys Theus wins the fastest welder contest at Kaiser Richmond Shipyard No. 2 in October 1944, demonstrating that women can match the best male welders in both speed and quality. The shipyards become particular symbols of women's industrial prowess. At the three Kaiser shipyards in Vancouver and Portland, over 31,000 women build ships by 1944. Before the war, women represented just 2% of the U.S. shipbuilding workforce. By 1944, they're nearly a third of all shipyard workers nationally, and in some facilities, they comprise 60% of the workforce. Building a ship is brutally hard work. Liberty ships are massive vessels, 441 feet long and weighing over 10,000 tons. They're built in sections that must be precisely welded together. The steel plates are thick and heavy. The welding must be flawless, as any weakness in a seam could cause catastrophic failure at sea. Women welders like Agnes Moore and Gladys Theus prove they can handle this skilled work just as effectively as men. Women don't just weld and rivet. Marian Souza works as a draftsman, revising complex blueprints in the engineering department. Her precision work ensures that construction teams have accurate plans to follow. Marian Wynn recalls a 17-year-old female colleague who redesigned sleeping quarters on ships, finding a way to fit 3 beds where the original plans only accommodated 2. Women work as electricians, crane operators, inspectors, and in countless other roles. Phyllis Gould, a welder at the Kaiser Shipyards, later reflected on how the experience transformed her self-perception. "From that point on, I always thought I can do anything I want to do," she said. "If I set my mind to it, I can do anything. And that's how I've lived the rest of my life." That sentiment, when you really stop to consider it, captures something profound about this moment. It's not just about winning the war. It's about women discovering capabilities they'd been told they didn't possess. The aircraft industry undergoes an equally dramatic transformation. In 1941, women make up only 1% of aviation employees. By 1943, they comprise an estimated 65% of the total workforce. This shift happens at breathtaking speed, driven by necessity and enabled by women's willingness to learn complex technical skills. Aircraft manufacturing requires extreme precision. A bomber like the B-17 contains thousands of components that must fit together perfectly. Tolerances are measured in thousandths of an inch. Women operate lathes, drill presses, grinders, and milling machines that shape aluminum and steel parts to exact specifications. They assemble engines with dozens of moving parts. They install electrical systems with hundreds of connections. They rivet aluminum skin onto aircraft frames, with each rivet needing to be set at precisely the right tension. Too loose and it won't hold, too tight and it weakens the metal. Consider this responsibility for a moment. The quality of their work directly impacts the safety of the pilots and crews who fly these aircraft. Women working in aircraft plants understand this responsibility acutely. Many have brothers, husbands, or boyfriends serving as aviators. The bomber they're building might be the one that brings their loved one home safely. That personal connection drives exceptional attention to detail and pride in workmanship. Beyond shipyards and aircraft factories, women fill industrial roles across the entire spectrum of war production. In munitions plants, they assemble artillery shells, bombs, and ammunition. The work is dangerous. Accidental explosions kill and injure workers throughout the war, but it's essential. In steel mills, women operate furnaces and rolling mills, producing the raw material for ships, tanks, and guns. In textile factories, they manufacture uniforms, parachutes, and other military supplies. In chemical plants, they produce explosives, medicines, and synthetic materials. Women also dominate what might be called the support infrastructure of war production. By 1945, 4.7 million women work in clerical positions, an 89% increase from before the war. These aren't glamorous jobs, but they're absolutely critical. Someone has to process purchase orders, maintain inventory records, calculate payroll, type reports, and handle the mountains of paperwork that keep vast industrial enterprises running. Women fill these roles with the same dedication they bring to the factory floor. The transformation isn't limited to young, single women. By 1945, nearly 1 out of every 4 married women works outside the home, a dramatic increase from pre-war years. These women face unique challenges. They're balancing factory shifts with household responsibilities that society still insists are primarily women's work. They're managing childcare in an era before widespread daycare. They're shopping for groceries with ration coupons, trying to stretch limited supplies to feed their families. They're doing laundry, cleaning, and cooking after 8-hour factory shifts. The Kaiser Shipyards and some other forward-thinking employers try to address these challenges. They offer childcare facilities at or near the workplace. They provide cafeterias where women can purchase affordable meals, reducing time spent cooking at home. Some plants establish on-site medical clinics to handle routine healthcare needs. These benefits, though far from universal, acknowledge that women workers aren't simply interchangeable with men. They have different needs that must be accommodated if they're to reach their full productive potential. Despite women's proven capabilities, they face persistent sexism and discrimination. Male coworkers and supervisors often treat them as temporary intruders in a man's world. Sexual harassment is rampant at many facilities, forcing women to request transfers to different roles or locations just to escape hostile work environments. The local media frequently portrays women welders and riveters as curiosities or outsiders rather than as legitimate workers. What the official reports rarely mention is the fight for equal pay. The equal pay issue becomes a major battleground. When women first enter defense industries, many employers try to pay them less than men for identical work. Labor unions, recognizing both the injustice and the threat this poses to men's wages, take up the fight. In 1942, the United Electrical Workers, UE, and the United Auto Workers, UAW, bring the equal pay question to the National War Labor Board. The unions win their landmark case, establishing equal pay for equal work as official government policy to be applied throughout industry. But policy and practice are different things. Many companies find ways around equal pay requirements. They classify jobs as men's work or women's work and pay different rates. They give women slightly different job titles even when they're doing identical tasks. They promote men more quickly, meaning women stay in lower-paying positions longer. The War Labor Board eventually orders major employers like General Electric and Westinghouse to eliminate gendered job classifications and establish funds to correct pay inequities. But this decision comes near the war's end, and many companies simply ignore it once the War Labor Board is disbanded. The pay discrimination is even more severe for African American women. When they manage to get hired in defense plants, Black women often receive the least desirable positions and the lowest wages. They face discrimination from employers, hostility from white coworkers, and segregation within factories. In some plants, facilities like restrooms, cafeterias, and locker rooms are segregated. Training opportunities are limited. Promotions are rare. Yet African American women persist, recognizing that even discriminatory defense work pays better than domestic service. By 1944, employment of Black women in defense industries has increased by 11.5% compared to pre-war levels, while their employment in domestic service has decreased by 15.3%. It's a significant shift that gives Black women economic opportunities and experiences that will influence the civil rights struggles ahead. Some defense facilities make genuine efforts toward integration. Executive Order 8802, signed by President Roosevelt, bans discrimination in defense industries, giving Black workers legal grounds to challenge exclusion. While enforcement is inconsistent, the order opens doors that were previously closed. The experience of whites working alongside Blacks during the war helps break down some social barriers and creates recognition of diversity that didn't exist before. By late 1944, America's industrial output has reached almost unimaginable levels. The factories that stood half empty in early 1942 are now running at maximum capacity, producing weapons and supplies at a rate that overwhelms the Axis powers. Women have been central to this achievement. More than 6 million women work in war industries. They're building 1/3 of all manufactured goods in the United States. By 1944, women hold 1/3 of all manufacturing jobs in America. The numbers tell a story of transformation you can still see evidence of today. Liberty ships that once took 355 days to build are now completed in an average of 42 days, with some constructed in as little as 4.5 days. Aircraft production has gone from hundreds per month to thousands. Ammunition production has increased 20-fold. American industry is outproducing Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. And this achievement is only possible because women answered the call. Marion Wynne, looking back on her shipyard experience decades later, captured the broader significance. "Women can do anything, and we've proven it time and time again," she said. "We had electricians and welders." That simple statement represents a revolution in American society's understanding of women's capabilities. But the factory floor is only one front in women's wartime mobilization. Even as Rosie the Riveter becomes an American icon, hundreds of thousands of other women are serving in uniform, taking on military roles that had never been open to them before. Their story is equally transformative. On July 20th, 1942, the first group of women trainees arrives at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. They step off trains into a scene of considerable public interest. Photographers, reporters, and curious onlookers all want to see these pioneers. The group includes 125 enlisted women and 440 officer candidates, 40 of whom are African American. They're here to become the founding members of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, soon to be redesignated as the Women's Army Corps. Picture this moment if you can. These women are making history with every step. Never before have women, except nurses, served within the ranks of the U.S. Army. But the same manpower crisis that opened factory doors has forced the military to reconsider its women-only as nurses policy. If women can build bombers, Surely they can perform administrative, clerical, and technical roles that would free men for combat duty. The path to this moment began in May 1941, when Congresswoman Edith Nourse Rogers of Massachusetts introduced legislation to create a women's military corps. Rogers foresaw that America might need women in uniform, and she wanted to ensure they would receive salary and benefits comparable to male soldiers. The bill languished until Pearl Harbor made the need undeniable. On May 15, 1942, Congress established the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or WAC. The compromise legislation reveals persistent resistance to women in military roles. WACs are auxiliaries working with the Army, not actual soldiers in it. They receive official status and salary, but few of the benefits granted to male soldiers. Women officers can't command men. The director of the WAC holds the rank of major, lower than would be typical for heading such an organization. WAC officers are paid less than their male equivalents. A WAC first officer does the work of a captain but receives a first lieutenant's pay. Despite these limitations, women volunteer enthusiastically. Oveta Kulpabi, sworn in as the first WAC director on May 16, 1942, becomes instrumental in promoting the Corps and dispelling public doubts. She emphasizes that each woman serving will release a man for combat, framing women's service as patriotic support for male soldiers rather than a challenge to traditional gender roles. The messaging is carefully calibrated to make women's military service palatable to a skeptical public. At Fort Des Moines, the first WACs undergo basic training. The program is abbreviated compared to what male recruits experience, consisting primarily of marching drills, military customs and courtesies, map reading, company administration, and supply and mess management. The training reflects expectations that women won't face combat and therefore don't need the same physical preparation or weapons training as men. But WACs quickly prove they're capable of mastering military training with ease. Within months, the organization expands beyond anyone's initial projections. Women fill clerical assignments, freeing thousands of men for combat roles. They work as radio operators, keeping communication networks running. They serve as electricians, maintaining electrical systems at bases worldwide. They become air traffic controllers, guiding aircraft safely to landing. They perform non-traditional jobs that military planners hadn't imagined women could handle. Recognition of women's capabilities leads to a critical change. In July 1943, after thousands of women have already enlisted, the U.S. Army drops the auxiliary designation. The organization becomes the Women's Army Corps, the WAC, a full component of the regular Army. From this point forward, members receive full U.S. Army benefits. It's a significant step toward equality, though women still can't serve in combat roles and face various restrictions male soldiers don't. By the war's end, more than 150,000 women have served in the WAC. They've proven indispensable to military operations. WACs serve with distinction throughout the war theaters in North Africa, Europe, and Asia. They land in Normandy after D-Day, working behind the advancing front lines. They serve in Australia, New Guinea, and the Philippines in the Pacific. 16,000 women who joined as WACs before the redesignation are belatedly granted veterans benefits in 1980, correcting a long-standing injustice. While the Army creates the WAC, the U.S. Navy establishes its own women's branch. On July 30, 1942, President Roosevelt signs legislation authorizing the creation of WAVs, women accepted for volunteer emergency service. The purpose is identical to the WAC, release officers and men for sea duty by replacing them with women in shore establishments. The WAVs face similar initial resistance. The notion of women serving in the Navy isn't widely supported in Congress or by naval personnel. But the efforts of the Navy's Women's Advisory Council, along with support from Eleanor Roosevelt, pushed the legislation through. Mildred H. McAfee, on leave as president of Wellesley College, becomes the first WAVE's director, commissioned as a lieutenant commander in August 1942 and later promoted to captain. The WAVEs grow rapidly. By the end of 1942, 3,190 enlistees and 770 officers have joined. By July 1945, membership has exploded to over 86,291 women, including 8,475 officers. During World War II, approximately 100,000 women serve in the WAVEs. They work in communications, intelligence, supply, administration, and numerous technical fields. Like their WAC counterparts, WAVEs prove they can perform military jobs as effectively as men. The Coast Guard establishes SPARs, derived from the Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. About 11,000 women serve in SPARs during the war. The Marine Corps, traditionally the most resistant to change, eventually creates the Marine Corps Women's Reserve. Even the Marines recognize they need women if they're going to maintain sufficient manpower for Pacific operations. But perhaps the most remarkable women's military service comes from an organization that isn't actually part of the military at all, the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP. The WASP story begins with two exceptional aviators. Nancy Harkness Love, the youngest American woman to earn her private pilot's license at the time, lobbies before the war for a program allowing female pilots to ferry warplanes from factories to air bases. Jackie Cochran, one of the most accomplished pilots of her era, demonstrates the concept's feasibility by flying a Lend-Lease bomber to England and organizing female pilots for Britain's Air Transport Auxiliary. By 1942, the war has created an acute shortage of male pilots available for transport duty. Military leaders, increasingly receptive to Love's and Cochran's proposals, approved the creation of two separate programs, the Women's Flying Training Detachment, WFD, and the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, WFS. In August 1943, these merged to form the WASP. More than 25,000 women apply to serve in WASP, though fewer than 10% are accepted. Candidates must be between 21 and 35 years old, have a pilot's license, and meet stringent flight experience requirements. Those accepted undergo rigorous training equivalent to what male Army Air Forces pilots receive. About 1,100 women ultimately earn their WASP wings. Consider the danger these women face daily. These women perform incredibly dangerous work. They ferry every type of military aircraft, fighters, bombers, cargo planes, from factories to bases and between installations. They fly over 60 million miles during the war. They tow targets for live anti-aircraft gun practice, with gunners sometimes firing at the plane itself. They simulate strafing missions. They test aircraft that have been repaired, often the most dangerous assignment since mechanical problems might not be fully resolved. 38 WASP members die in service. 1, Gertrude Tompkins, disappears on a ferry mission, her fate still unknown. What most Americans never learned at the time was this harsh reality. These women face the same risks as male military pilots, but because WASP has civilian rather than military status, their families don't receive death benefits or Gold Star recognition. When a WASP dies, her colleagues have to pool money to ship her body home for burial. The WASP arrangement with the Army Air Forces ends on December 20th, 1944. Despite their service and sacrifices, WASP members are simply dismissed without veterans' benefits or recognition. It takes until 1977, more than 3 decades later, for Congress to grant them veteran status. In 2009, WASP members finally received the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest civilian honors. The question of why WASP was the only women's branch denied military status during the war reveals ongoing resistance to women in certain roles. Flying combat aircraft, even in non-combat situations, apparently crossed a line that even the labor-desperate military wasn't willing to fully accept. The WASP members' eventual recognition represents a partial correction of this injustice, but it comes too late for many who died without ever receiving the honor they deserved. African American women face additional barriers in military service. The WAC initially follows War Department quota guidelines, limiting Black women to 10% of enrollment to match their proportion in the general population. Basic training is fully segregated for living, dining, and training, while living quarters remain segregated at officer training and specialist schools. Dining and training facilities at these institutions are eventually integrated. By the war's end, 6,520 African American women have served in the WAC. About 500 Black nurses serve in the Army Nurse Corps. The Waves eventually accept almost 100 Black women, while the Coast Guard SPARS has just 5. These numbers reflect ongoing discrimination, but they also represent unprecedented opportunities for Black women to serve their country in uniform. The story of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion illustrates both the challenges and achievements of Black women in uniform. This all-African American, all-female battalion is the only such unit to serve overseas during World War II. Commanded by Major Charity Adams Early, one of only 2 Black WACs promoted to major during the war, the 6,888th ships to England in early 1945, then on to France. Their mission is to sort through a massive backlog of mail from American service members in the European theater. Years of mail have piled up undelivered, severely damaging morale among troops who haven't heard from home in months. Imagine being given that assignment. The 6,888th faces a seemingly impossible task: sort millions of pieces of mail, much of it incorrectly addressed, and get it to the right recipients. Working in 3 shifts around the clock, the women of the 6,888th complete the job in half the expected time, just 3 months instead of 6. Each 8-hour shift averages more than 65,000 pieces of mail sorted. Major Adams is intensely proud of her unit's achievement. The 6,888th demonstrates that Black women can perform complex logistical operations as effectively as anyone. Yet these women face prejudice from multiple directions. They endure racism from white American soldiers and discrimination from military authorities. They face skepticism from family and friends back home who question why Black women would want to join a military that treats them as second-class citizens. But they persevere, recognizing that their service opens opportunities for future generations of women of color in the military. In total, approximately 350,000 women serve in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II. They work in more than 200 non-combat jobs stateside and overseas. By 1945, the Women's Army Corps has more than 100,000 members and 6,000 female officers. More than 1,000 women serve as WASP pilots. Thousands more join the Waves, SPARS, and Marine Corps Women's Reserve. The legacy of these women extends far beyond the war years. These women prove that military service isn't exclusively masculine. They demonstrate that women can handle complex technical work, maintain discipline under pressure, and serve with distinction in challenging environments. Their service lays groundwork for the eventual full integration of women into the U.S. military, though that process will take decades to complete. But even as hundreds of thousands of women serve in uniform and millions more build weapons in factories, another group of women fights the war in perhaps the most secret way possible. They don't weld ships or ferry planes. They work in nondescript buildings, hunched over encrypted messages, using mathematics and pattern recognition to crack enemy codes. They're the code girls, and their contribution to victory is as important as any made on factory floors or in military bases. In late 1942, a young woman named Genevieve Grotjen Grabiel takes a train from Lynchburg, Virginia, to Washington, D.C. An Army recruiter named Paavo Carlson has offered her a job doing something. He can't say what because nobody has told him either. Grabiel's father agrees she'll be happier in Washington, shuffling paper for 6 months. They both assume it'll be routine clerical work. On December 28, 1942, Grabiel arrives at Arlington Hall, a former women's junior college that the Army has converted into something very different. She receives hasty training in the art and science of breaking codes. For weeks after arriving, she's directed to attack Soviet intercepts, an immensely secret and sensitive task even in that secret place. She probably doesn't realize it yet, and neither would you in her position, but she's about to become part of one of the most significant intelligence operations in American history. Arlington Hall Station is the center of the Army's cryptography effort. The building itself is unremarkable. It was Arlington Hall Junior College for Women until the military took it over. But inside, approximately 10,000 people, roughly 90% of them women, are working to break access codes and ciphers. They're deciphering encrypted Japanese and German communications, providing intelligence that helps Allied forces target Axis leaders and enemy ships, and even coordinate the D-Day invasion. The women working at Arlington Hall and similar facilities become known as the Code Girls. They're cryptographers who create codes and cryptanalysts who break them. Most have college educations, often in mathematics or languages. They're recruited from universities, teaching physicians, and clerical jobs. Recruiters seek women with analytical minds, attention to detail, and absolute discretion. The recruitment often happens quietly. Army officers visit college campuses, speaking with professors and deans to identify promising candidates. They approach women with strong academic records, particularly in mathematics, foreign languages, or science. They're deliberately vague about what the job entails. Most women who accept have no idea they're being hired to break enemy codes. They're told only that their work will be important to the war effort and must remain completely secret. Since most men are off fighting, the recruiters focus overwhelmingly on women. This turns out to be fortunate. Women prove exceptionally talented at code-breaking work. The painstaking attention to detail, the patience to work through thousands of encrypted messages looking for patterns, the linguistic skills to recognize subtle word usage. These are capabilities that many women possess in abundance. What you need to understand about Arlington Hall is the sheer complexity of the challenge. At Arlington Hall, most work focuses on Japanese Army codes, which are fiendishly complex. Japanese military communications use multiple layers of encoding. First, messages are written in Japanese, which few Americans can read. Then they're encrypted using codebooks that substitute numbers or symbols for words or phrases. Finally, the encrypted text is further scrambled using mathematical operations. Breaking these codes requires linguistic knowledge, mathematical ability, and persistent pattern analysis. The Code Girls work in teams, each focusing on different aspects of the problem. Some analyze the structure of intercepted messages, looking for patterns in how they're formatted. Others build cribs, educated guesses about what certain encrypted phrases might mean based on context. Still others work on recovering the actual codebooks, essentially rebuilding the enemy's encryption system through analysis of enough messages. The work is intellectually demanding and intensely frustrating. Women might spend weeks or months analyzing a particular code system without making progress. Then suddenly, a breakthrough. Someone notices a pattern or makes a correct guess or finds a flaw in how the enemy is applying their encryption, and the code cracks open. The feeling of success when a code breaks is reportedly intoxicating. These women are literally reading the enemy's secrets, gaining intelligence that saves American lives. The intelligence derived from code-breaking operations, given the codename Magic for Japanese codes and Ultra for German codes, proves invaluable throughout the war. Decrypted Japanese messages help American forces anticipate enemy movements in the Pacific. They reveal Japanese naval dispositions before major battles. They expose Japanese plans to reinforce specific islands, allowing American forces to interdict supply convoys. Lives are saved and battles won because of what the code girls discover. But the work remains invisible to the public and most of the military. The women at Arlington Hall work in secrecy so complete that even people in adjacent departments often don't know what their colleagues are doing. When Gabriel is assigned to Soviet intercepts, she and her partner are seated in one corner of a room and told to speak only in whispers. The British liaison officer sharing their office isn't supposed to know what they're working on. The secrecy extends beyond the war. Code girls sign oaths promising never to reveal their work. Most keep that promise for decades, never telling even spouses or children what they did during the war. Imagine keeping a secret that's significant for 50 years. When friends ask what they did, they say they were secretaries or file clerks, which is technically true. Much of the work involves typing, filing, and paperwork. But that omits the crucial detail that they were analyzing some of the war's most sensitive intelligence. Arlington Hall is unusual for the time in that up to 15% of its workforce is Black, an effort at equity that Eleanor Roosevelt may have personally mandated. This is far higher than the proportion of African Americans in most military or government facilities during the segregated 1940s. But the Black women at Arlington Hall face a particular form of invisibility. They work in segregated units, separate from their white counterparts. Between the top-secret nature of the work and the racial segregation of the period, even people working at Arlington Hall are often unaware of the Black women's contributions. The Black women code breakers face the same intellectual challenges as their white colleagues, but with additional burdens. They work in segregated facilities with separate dining areas and restrooms. They're often assigned more routine tasks, though some break through to advanced cryptanalysis work. After the war, their stories remain even more hidden than those of white code girls, buried under layers of classification and racial discrimination that make recognition nearly impossible. The Navy runs its own code-breaking operation, focused primarily on Japanese naval communications. The office eventually grows to over 10,000 employees, the majority of them women. Like their Army counterparts, these women work in absolute secrecy, breaking codes that reveal Japanese fleet movements and battle plans. The intelligence they provide contributes directly to American naval victories in the Pacific. Consider what happened in 1943 to understand the true impact of this work. One particular breakthrough demonstrates the impact of code-breaking work. In 1943, American cryptanalysts, including women at Arlington Hall, successfully decrypt messages revealing that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, will be flying on an inspection tour of Japanese bases in the South Pacific. The decrypts provide his exact flight path and timing. American P-38 fighters intercept and shoot down Yamamoto's plane, killing the Japanese Navy's most brilliant strategist. The mission succeeds only because code girls and their colleagues broke the encrypted messages. After the war ends, the work continues. Genevieve Grotjen-Grabiel and her small team analyzing Soviet communications are working on what will become the Venona Project, one of the most consequential intelligence operations of the early Cold War. Over the next several years, they decrypt Soviet intelligence cables that reveal extensive Soviet espionage in the United States, including atomic bomb secrets being passed to Moscow. Their work exposes several Soviet spy rings and contributes to major cases like those of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The women code breakers of World War II demonstrate that intelligence work isn't exclusively male territory. They prove that complex cryptanalysis requires not just technical skill but patience, attention to detail, and linguistic sensitivity, qualities that many women possess in abundance. Yet their contributions remain largely unknown for decades. Here's what makes this story even more remarkable. It's not until the 1990s and 2000s, when much of the wartime intelligence work is declassified, that historians begin documenting the Code Girls' achievements. Books like Liza Mundy's Code Girls finally give public recognition to women whose work was as vital as any factory production or military service. In 2021, Arlington's Foreign Service Institute dedicates a memorial recognizing the contributions of the women codebreakers who worked at Arlington Hall Station. The recognition comes 76 years late, but it comes. The Code Girls represent a different dimension of women's wartime service, one based on intellect rather than physical labor, on secrecy rather than public visibility. They worked not in factories that everyone could see, but in classified facilities that few knew existed. They produced not ships or planes, but intelligence, invisible but invaluable. And like the women welders, pilots, and soldiers, they proved that women's capabilities extended far beyond what society had previously recognized. By 1944, American women are contributing to the war effort in nearly every conceivable way. They're building the weapons, serving in uniform, cracking enemy codes, and supporting the home front through countless other means. More than 6 million work in war industries. Another 350,000 serve in military branches. Thousands more work in intelligence. Millions of others support the war through volunteer work, war bond purchases, victory gardens, and managing households under rationing restrictions. This massive mobilization represents the largest shift in women's roles in American history up to that point. Women have proven they can do work that society insisted only men could perform. They've demonstrated capabilities that conventional wisdom said they didn't possess. They've earned wages that give them economic independence. And they've experienced a taste of equality that many will be reluctant to surrender when the war ends. But wartime service comes at tremendous cost. Women face discrimination, harassment, and unequal treatment throughout their service. They work double shifts, one in the factory or office, another at home. They sacrifice time with children and endure housing shortages in overcrowded war production cities. And some pay the ultimate price. The story of women's wartime sacrifice and struggle, when you examine it closely, is as important as the story of their achievements. Understanding what they overcame makes their accomplishments even more remarkable. The propaganda posters make it look glamorous. Rosie the Riveter flexes her bicep with a confident smile. Women in factories are portrayed as stylish, happy, and empowered. The recruitment materials emphasize patriotism, good wages, and the opportunity to support the boys overseas. But here's what those posters never showed. Walk into a shipyard at 6 a.m. on a winter morning in 1943, and you'll see what the posters don't show. Women arrive in the dark, often after dropping children at makeshift daycare facilities. They put on heavy protective gear, welding masks, thick gloves, steel-toed boots. They climb onto scaffolding 30 feet above the ground, working in temperatures that range from freezing cold to sweltering heat depending on the season. They breathe fumes from welding and painting that irritate their lungs. They risk burns from molten metal, cuts from sharp steel edges, and crushing injuries from heavy equipment. The medical records from Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond reveal the physical toll. Women welders and riveters suffer from the same occupational diseases and injuries as their male counterparts. They develop respiratory problems from inhaling metal dust and fumes. They experience hearing loss from constant noise. They suffer burns, lacerations, and fractures. Some injuries are minor, a cut finger, a bruised hand. Others are catastrophic. Workers crushed by falling materials, severe burns from welding accidents, fatal injuries from equipment malfunctions. The work is physically exhausting in ways that few women have experienced before. Riveting requires holding a heavy pneumatic rivet gun for hours at a time. Welding means maintaining awkward positions while concentrating intensely on creating perfect seams. Assembly line work involves repetitive motions that cause muscle strain and joint pain. An 8-hour shift leaves women physically spent, but for many, the workday isn't over. Try to picture managing both lives simultaneously. They come home to their second shift, the unpaid labor of running a household. Shopping for groceries becomes a complex challenge under wartime rationing. Women must manage ration books with stamps for meat, sugar, butter, and other staples. They plan meals around what's available, stretching limited supplies to feed their families. They cook, clean, do laundry, and care for children, all the domestic work that society still considers primarily women's responsibility, regardless of whether they're also working full-time in a factory. Childcare presents particular challenges. Before the war, most married women with children don't work outside the home. But wartime necessity changes that, and childcare infrastructure doesn't keep pace. Some war industries establish on-site childcare facilities, recognizing that women can't work if they have no one to watch their children. Kaiser Shipyards creates childcare centers that operate around the clock to accommodate different shifts. But these facilities are the exception, not the rule. Most women cobbled together informal arrangements, leaving children with relatives, older siblings, neighbors, or in questionable private daycares. The strain shows in divorce rates and family conflicts. Traditional gender roles are being upended, and not everyone handles it well. Some husbands resent their wives working, seeing it as a challenge to their role as breadwinner. Others worry about their wives working alongside other men, in environments where traditional social supervision is absent. Women themselves sometimes struggle with guilt over not being home with their children or with the sheer exhaustion of balancing two demanding roles. Beyond physical exhaustion and family strain, women face persistent discrimination and hostility in the workplace. Male coworkers often view them as temporary intruders in a man's world. Some men deliberately make the work environment hostile, using crude language, sexual harassment, and practical jokes designed to drive women out. Women welders at shipyards report being propositioned, groped, and subjected to constant sexual comments. Supervisors sometimes side with male harassers rather than protecting female workers. What the official histories rarely discuss is the pay inequality. The equal pay battle becomes a major source of friction. When women first enter war industries, many employers simply pay them less than men for identical work. A male welder might earn $1 per hour, while a woman doing the same work receives 75 cents. Employers justify this disparity with various excuses. Women don't need as much money because they have husbands to support them. Women aren't as strong as men. Women are temporary workers who don't deserve the same wages. Labor unions, recognizing both the injustice and the threat to men's wages, take up the fight. If employers can pay women less for the same work, What's to stop them from replacing all male workers with cheaper female labor? The United Electrical Workers and the United Auto Workers bring cases to the National War Labor Board, winning landmark rulings establishing equal pay for equal work as official policy. But policy and practice diverge widely. Many companies find creative ways to circumvent equal pay requirements. They classify identical jobs under different titles, light assembly for women and assembly for men, then pay different rates. They reserve higher-paying skilled positions for men, claiming women lack the necessary qualifications. They promote men more quickly, ensuring women spend more time in lower-paying entry positions. The War Labor Board eventually orders major employers like General Electric and Westinghouse to establish funds to correct pay inequities and eliminate gendered job classifications. But enforcement is inconsistent, and many companies simply ignore the requirements once wartime oversight ends. For African American women, the struggles are compounded. They face discrimination as women and as Black Americans. When defense plants first open their doors, many simply refuse to hire Black workers at all. Others relegate them to the lowest paying, least desirable positions, janitorial work, cleaning, basic assembly tasks requiring minimal skill. Training opportunities are limited or non-existent. Promotions are extremely rare. Even after President Roosevelt signs Executive Order 8802 banning discrimination in defense industries, enforcement remains spotty. Some companies comply grudgingly, creating segregated work areas where Black employees labor separately from whites. Facilities like restrooms, cafeterias, and locker rooms are segregated. At some plants, white workers threaten strikes if forced to work alongside Black colleagues. The discrimination extends beyond the workplace. Black women working in war production cities like Richmond or Mobile face housing discrimination, with landlords refusing to rent to them. They're excluded from many restaurants, shops, and recreational facilities. They ride segregated buses and trains. The money they earn in defense work means little if they can't find decent places to live or feel safe in their communities. Yet African American women persist. For many, even discriminatory defense work represents a significant improvement over domestic service. A Black woman who made $8 or $10 per week cleaning white people's homes can earn $30 or $40 per week in a defense plant, even in a lower-paying position. That economic improvement provides opportunities to escape poverty, support families, and build savings. Some Black women break through barriers to reach skilled positions. At Arlington Hall Station, where Eleanor Roosevelt reportedly ensures higher Black employment than at most government facilities, some African American women work as cryptanalysts, performing the same complex code-breaking tasks as their white colleagues. Though they work in segregated units, their intellectual contributions match those of anyone else in the facility. Consider the long-term impact of this experience. The experience of working in war industries and serving in the military plants seeds that will grow into the civil rights movement. Black women who prove they can weld ships, break codes, and serve in uniform aren't likely to accept being relegated to domestic service after the war. The experience of working alongside white women, even in segregated circumstances, creates relationships and understanding that didn't exist before. The gap between the rhetoric of fighting for democracy abroad and the reality of discrimination at home becomes increasingly difficult to justify. Women serving in the military face their own set of struggles. Beyond the regular challenges of military life, they endure constant questioning of their motivations and morality. Ugly rumors circulate that women join the WAC or WAVES primarily to find husbands or engage in promiscuous behavior. These slanders are so widespread and damaging that military leaders have to launch deliberate campaigns to counter them. Parents worry about their daughters' reputations. Society questions whether decent women should be wearing military uniforms at all. The WASP pilots face particularly frustrating challenges. They perform the same dangerous work as male ferry pilots, flying fighters and bombers thousands of miles, testing repaired aircraft, towing targets for live-fire anti-aircraft practice. But because WASP has civilian rather than military status, they receive no military benefits. When a WASP dies in service, her colleagues have to pool money to ship her body home for burial. Families receive no death benefits, no gold star to hang in their windows, no military funeral. 38 WASP members died during the war. Cornelia Fort becomes the first American woman pilot to die on active duty when her plane crashes during a ferrying mission in March 1943. Gertrude Tompkins disappears without a trace while ferrying a P-51 Mustang in October 1944. Neither she nor her plane is ever found. Each death is a reminder of the risks these women take, and each funeral is a bitter reminder that their service isn't officially recognized as military. The end of WASP operations in December 1944 adds insult to injury. Despite their excellent safety record and proven capability, the program is terminated. Male pilots returning from combat duty want ferry jobs, and the military decides civilian women pilots are expendable. The WASP members are simply dismissed, no ceremony, no recognition, no benefits. They're told to return to civilian life as if their service never happened. It will take 33 years before they're granted veteran status and 70 years before they receive the Congressional Gold Medal. By 1944, the physical and emotional toll of sustained war production begins to show. Women have been working grueling hours for 2 or 3 years straight. The initial patriotic excitement has given way to exhaustion. Turnover rates at some factories reach 100% annually as women burn out and quit. Absenteeism increases as workers take time off to recover from illness or injury, or simply to catch up on neglected household tasks. Yet production must continue. The war in Europe and the Pacific is reaching its climax, and the demand for weapons and supplies remains intense. Women keep showing up to factories and shipyards, keep putting on their protective gear, keep climbing onto scaffolding and taking positions on assembly lines. They understand that their work directly supports husbands, brothers, sons, and boyfriends fighting overseas. Every ship they build might bring those men home safely. Every plane they rivet might protect American troops. That knowledge keeps them going even when they're exhausted. The casualties extend beyond workplace injuries. Some women lose their lives in industrial accidents, explosions at munitions plants, equipment failures at factories, catastrophic mistakes that no one could have prevented. Others lose family members to the war, husbands, sons, brothers killed in combat overseas. These Gold Star mothers and widows often keep working, channeling their grief into their labor. If they can't bring their loved ones home, at least they can help bring the war to an end. The stories of sacrifice are countless. Agnes Moore, the 99-year-old former welder, recalled decades later how she'd stand on the outfitting dock at Richmond Shipyards, watching the Liberty ships she helped build sail away to war. "We didn't know which ones would make it back," she said. Some ships were torpedoed by U-boats, taking their crews, and the cargo women helped build to the bottom of the Atlantic. But most made it through, completing multiple voyages that kept Allied forces supplied. Phyllis Gould, another welder, remembered the constant awareness that her work mattered. "We knew that the ships we were building, the planes being made, were going to protect our guys." That sense of purpose sustained women through the hardest times. When they wanted to quit, when the work seemed unbearable, they reminded themselves why they were doing it. By early 1945, the end is finally in sight. Germany surrenders in May, ending the war in Europe. Japan capitulates in August after atomic bombs devastate Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war that transformed American society is over. And with its end comes a question millions of women must confront. What happens now? For women who've spent 3 or 4 years building weapons, serving in uniform, breaking codes, and proving their capabilities, the answer will be both surprising and devastating. The celebrations began on August 15th, 1945, Vijay Day. Across America, people pour into streets, dancing, kissing, crying with joy and relief. The war is over. The boys are coming home. Life can return to normal. But stop and ask yourself, what does normal mean for the 6 million women who've spent the war working in industries they'd never entered before? What does it mean for the 350,000 women who wore military uniforms? What does it mean for the thousands of code breakers, pilots, and defense workers who discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed? The answer comes swiftly and unambiguously. Women are expected to leave. Within months of Vijay Day, defense plants began laying off women workers en masse. The men returning from military service need jobs, and both government and industry make clear that those jobs belong to veterans, not to the women who filled them temporarily. By 1946, 2 million women have been fired from heavy industrial jobs. Many are simply told not to return after their shift ends. Others receive formal termination notices giving them a few days or weeks' warning. The layoffs are explicitly gendered. In plant after plant, women are terminated while less experienced men, including newly returned veterans who've never worked in the industry, are retained or hired. Union seniority systems, which theoretically protect workers based on years of service, are ignored when it comes to women. The principle of last hired, first fired is reinterpreted to mean women first, regardless of when they were hired. Some women fight to keep their jobs. Union activists argue that seniority should be gender neutral, that women who've worked for 3 or 4 years deserve protection before men who just arrived. They point out that many women are supporting families. They're widows whose husbands died in the war, or wives whose husbands returned disabled, or single mothers who depend on factory wages. But these arguments largely fail. The cultural consensus is clear. More work was women's patriotic duty, and now their patriotic duty is to step aside and let men have the jobs. The military branches follow similar patterns. The WAC, Waves, SPARS, and Marine Corps Women's Reserve all dramatically reduced their numbers after the war. Some women are discharged immediately. Others are retained in peacetime military roles, but face uncertainty about career prospects. The WASP, which never had military status to begin with, simply ceases to exist on December 20th, 1944, before the war even ends. The women pilots are dismissed without ceremony or recognition. By 1947, women's participation in the labor force has declined significantly from its wartime peak. Many women have returned to the domestic sphere, becoming full-time homemakers. Others have shifted to traditionally female occupations, clerical work, teaching, nursing, retail. The proportion of women in manufacturing drops dramatically. The shipyards and aircraft factories that once employed hundreds of thousands of women now employ predominantly men. But here's something that might surprise you. While many women leave the workforce, others don't or can't. By 1950, despite all the pressure to return home, more women are employed than at the war's peak. The total number is higher because women have shifted from high-paying industrial jobs to lower-paying service and clerical positions. A woman who earned $40 per week as a welder might now earn $20 per week as a secretary. She's still working, but her economic status has declined significantly. The transformation reveals something crucial. World War II changed women's relationship to work permanently, even if it didn't immediately change their opportunities. Before the war, the typical working woman was young and single, expected to quit when she married. After the war, increasing numbers of married women remain in or return to the workforce. The experience of earning wages, of economic independence, of proving their capabilities, these experiences can't simply be erased. For African American women, the post-war transition is particularly complex. Many Black women who entered defense work during the war are pushed back into domestic service afterward. Yet the proportion who resist is notable. The number of Black women working as domestic servants never returns to pre-war levels. Some find employment in other sectors. Others pursue education. The war experience has shown them alternatives to a lifetime of cleaning white people's homes for minimal wages. Consider how these seeds would grow over the coming decades. The seeds planted during the war will take decades to fully germinate, but they do germinate. The women who prove they could weld ships and fly planes and break codes will raise daughters who expect opportunities their mothers didn't have. The Black women who experience both the possibilities and limitations of wartime integration will become part of the civil rights movement. The experience of working alongside people from different backgrounds will contribute to slowly changing social attitudes. Congress makes some efforts to recognize women's military service. The Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948 allows women to serve as permanent members of the armed forces, rather than only during wartime emergencies. But the act imposes significant restrictions. Women can exceed 2% of total military personnel, can't be promoted above colonel except in nursing, and can't command men. It's limited progress, but it's progress nonetheless. The WASP members receive no recognition at all for decades. Their files are sealed and classified. The government denies their service ever had military character. When they apply for veterans' benefits, they're rejected. When they seek recognition at veterans' memorials and military cemeteries, they're turned away. It's not until 1977, 33 years after the program ended, that Congress finally grants WASP members veteran status. Another 32 years pass before they receive the Congressional Gold Medal in 2009. The Code Girls face a different kind of erasure. They sign secrecy oaths that most honor for decades. They can't tell their stories because the work remains classified. When asked what they did during the war, they say they were secretaries or file clerks, technically true but completely misleading. Imagine keeping a secret that monumental from your own family for 50 years. Their husbands and children grow up never knowing that mom was a cryptanalyst who helped break Japanese codes. The full story of their contributions doesn't emerge until the 1990s and 2000s, when documents are finally declassified and historians begin researching the topic. Genevieve Grotjen-Grabiel, the young woman who arrived at Arlington Hall expecting to shuffle paper, continues working in intelligence through the Cold War. Her work on Soviet codes contributes to exposing atomic espionage, but she can't discuss any of this publicly for decades. The recognition comes late, far too late for many code girls who die without ever receiving acknowledgement of what they accomplished. In 2021, Arlington's Foreign Service Institute finally dedicates a memorial to the women code breakers of Arlington Hall Station. The ceremony takes place 76 years after the war ended. Most of the women being honored are long dead. But the few surviving code girls who attend express gratitude that their service is finally being recognized publicly. The broader cultural legacy of Rosie the Riveter and the women she represents proves more enduring than the immediate employment opportunities. The image of the strong, capable woman in work clothes becomes iconic. The "We Can Do It" poster becomes one of the most recognizable images in American history. Rosie symbolizes female empowerment and capability. But there's irony in how Rosie is remembered. The woman in the famous "We Can Do It" poster, the one with the red bandana and flexed bicep, wasn't actually used to recruit women to war work. It was an internal Westinghouse poster meant to reduce absenteeism, displayed for only 2 weeks in February 1943. The poster didn't become famous until feminists rediscovered it in the 1980s and adopted it as a symbol of women's equality. So the most iconic image of women's wartime service wasn't even publicly visible during the war itself. The real Rosies, the millions of women who actually did the work, receive far less attention. Agnes Moore, Phyllis Gould, Marion Souza, Marion Wynne, and countless others live long lives after the war, but few people know their stories. It's only decades later, when historians and journalists begin interviewing the surviving women, that their personal accounts become part of the historical record. By the time these interviews occur, many women are in their 80s or 90s. Agnes Moore is 99 when she shares her story. Their memories remain vivid: the excitement of learning to weld, the pride in seeing ships they built sail away, the satisfaction of earning good wages, the sense of contributing to something larger than themselves. But there's also sadness in many accounts. Sadness that their work was dismissed as temporary, that society expected them to simply return to limited roles, that recognition came so late or not at all. The long-term economic impact of women's wartime work proves significant, even if not immediately apparent. Economist Claudia Golden's research shows that World War II substantially increased women's labor force participation rates permanently. While many women left factories after the war, overall female workforce participation continued rising in subsequent decades. The war demonstrated that women could work outside the home without catastrophic social consequences. It broke down barriers and changed attitudes, creating space for the women's rights movements of the 1960s and 1970s. The military integration that began during World War II continues, slowly and fitfully. Women serve in increasing numbers and roles in subsequent conflicts: Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. Restrictions on women's military service gradually fall away. In 2013, the ban on women in combat positions is lifted. In 2015, all military occupations open to women. The WASP members who served at Fort Des Moines in 1942, facing skepticism and discrimination, opened doors that future generations of women would walk through. The Code Girls' legacy lives on in modern signals intelligence. The National Security Agency, successor to the wartime code-breaking operations, continues to employ thousands of analysts, many of them women, breaking modern encrypted communications. The traditions and techniques developed at Arlington Hall and similar facilities form the foundation of contemporary cryptanalysis. In recent years, efforts to memorialize women's wartime contributions have accelerated. Museums create exhibits honoring Rosie the Riveter and women war workers. Monuments are erected recognizing women's military service. Books, documentaries, and films tell their stories. In 2024, the film The 6888 brings attention to the story of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, the all-black, all-female unit that sorted mail in Europe. These recognition efforts matter. They correct the historical record, acknowledging contributions that were minimized or erased. They honor women who served and sacrificed with little recognition. They provide role models for contemporary women entering fields that still face gender barriers. But perhaps most importantly, they preserve the truth about how World War II was actually won. The arsenal of democracy that overwhelmed the Axis powers wasn't built by men alone. It was built by millions of women who stepped into roles society told them they couldn't handle, who proved conventional wisdom wrong, who endured discrimination and exhaustion and danger because their country needed them. The 6 million women who powered America's industrial might during World War II didn't just build ships and planes. They built a foundation for social change that would reshape American society for generations. They demonstrated that women's capabilities extended far beyond traditional boundaries. They proved that women's work and men's work were artificial distinctions that crumbled when necessity demanded. Phyllis Gould, the welder who discovered she could do anything she set her mind to, captured the lasting impact. From that point on, I always thought I can do anything I want to do. If I set my mind to it, I can do anything. And that's how I've lived the rest of my life. That's the real legacy, and it's one you can still see reflected in society today. Not just the ships built or codes broken, but the transformation in how women saw themselves and how society saw them. The legend of the 6 million women who powered America's World War II industrial might is a legend of capability discovered, barriers broken, and possibilities expanded. It's a legend that continues to inspire.